Air traffic control privatization will not work, nor will it benefit everyone, as some claim. From a pilot, from the entire general aviation community, yeah, these guys right here, and these ones too, hear me out. Let us use a popular article written by the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal called An Air Traffic Win. This article does not fully emphasize the effects of a privatized ATC system in the United States and presents data and arguments that are not satisfactory to the subject. This article is inspired by the sparks being tossed around in the House by Pennsylvania Congressman Bill Shuster. Shuster pushed for the privatization of ATC, to which you might ask, well, what exactly is this? According to the official definition, it is the transfer of a business, industry, or service from public to private ownership and control. So, in short, these government dudes who run the FAA and the ATC system in the United States, they'll be replaced like people like Spirit and Delta. Imagine the legroom you get on a Spirit flight. That's basically the same space between you and another jet traveling at 500 miles an hour. But I digress. The Wall Street Journal begins by offering real world examples of successful systems that have been privatized, such as the Canadian air traffic control system, which we'll get back to later. Though in this section we also see a very patronizing and condescending tone towards business travelers and private aviators, i.e., most of the people who are opposing this bill, using phrases like, if the proletariat sitting in steerage pays for air services, so should a CEO flying across the country for lunch. This puts many of these travelers between a rock and a hard place due to its simplification of the nature of this bill, making them look kind of overprivileged. As a private pilot, this article isn't meant to convince me, though. It's directed at you, the people who don't fly as often, who aren't within aviation. In this day and age, it's pretty easy to sound like you know what you're talking about using big words and famous names. The editorial board at the Wall Street Journal takes full advantage of this fact. Privatization is a pretty complex system, especially when it involves the biggest and most crowded airspace in the world. The Wall Street Journal puts it in bite sizes rather than telling us the whole story. There's quite a lack of first-hand experience from many of the authors when it comes to the world of aviation too, relying instead on the opinions of one side of the argument rather than offering a counter-argument. More on this later too. This article, at its core, is a very broad look at privatization. Though, as critical as I am of this article, credit goes where credit is due. The Wall Street Journal is extremely effective in their use of the three emotional appeals ethos, pathos, and logos. When it comes to convincing the general public, this article is a stunning piece of rhetoric, using examples such as Canada for logos and the rich CEO to appeal our pathos and ethos. But rewind a bit. What about Canada, you might ask? This article uses Canada's privatization, in air quotes, as an example that it can work in big countries. But this example exhibits one very big flaw, and that is that Canada's airspace and airborne traffic is a fraction of the daily traffic that passes through the states on a daily basis. Not to mention, America is also profiting monumentally from general aviation. We're talking millions of dollars here. Privatization will raise the price that it costs to fly privately due to extended user fees, along with already existing fees. Most aviators won't be able to afford to fly anymore, because as I said before, GA pilots are just like you and me, not all of them are rich. Conversely, we'll also see a decrease in young aspiring aviators trying their hand because of the cost to flight train, and they already cost quite a lot, trust me. So less students means less pilots, which means less people to fly the big planes, which means slower flying times, slower travel times. But I digress. This article misses much of the other side and offers no counter argument. One final feature I'd like to explore before we move on is one final argument that all, and I mean all, advocates for privatization rejoice at: faster flights, cheaper flights, and less delays. This fact is simply incorrect. Money is not the root of any of these issues. Flights are limited by airspace capacity and the amount of aircraft available. Delays are usually caused by traffic volume on the ground and maintenance issues. No level of privatization can fix that. This article appeals to what consumers want to hear: cheap, fast flights, but nevertheless, it will never be able to convince pilots. And going back on that last point, though I am very critical of it, this article is actually somewhat effective in convincing the general public that ATC privatization is good for us all. Like I said before, it's not going to be able to convince pilots, but many people who aren't pilots, this sounds pretty good. I mean, it sounds good to have cheap, fast flights. The use of government officials and promises of less delays and cheaper flights is exactly what many consumers would like to hear. Though pilots might scoff at this idea, it fares pretty well with those who aren't as well versed and aren't fully into the world of aviation. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. And in that sense, they did that pretty well.